Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative question. What if the biggest threat to science right now isn't money or technology, but an idea? An ideology so powerful that it's actually causing scientists to stay silent, creating huge and potentially dangerous gaps in what we know.
So, let's start with a story you probably know. Galileo, right? Forced by the powers that be to take back a scientific fact, that the Earth revolves around the sun. It's kind of the ultimate story of science versus dogma. But what if that same dynamic is playing out right now, in labs and universities all across the globe?
And that's the big argument we're digging into today, that we are living in a brand new Galileo moment. Only this time, the pressure isn't coming from a church. It's coming from a social ideology that's all about protecting people from offense, which sounds good, but it might be effectively telling scientists that some questions are just too dangerous to ask.
Okay, so how exactly does this pressure even work? Well, it all starts with this really weird contradiction in how we think about free speech. And this is creating something that people are calling a chilling effect on actual scientific research.
And here's the core of the problem. On one hand, we say, yeah, let's have an open discussion. All ideas are welcome. But on the other hand, when push comes to shove, we also say, whoa, hold on. We need to protect people from speech that could be seen as offensive. It's this clash where the desire for safety can end up shutting down uncomfortable but sometimes really necessary scientific questions. The result of that clash, it's this. A chilling effect. I mean, just imagine you're a scientist. You're studying a really sensitive topic. The fear of a social media mob, of losing your job, of being completely ruined professionally, it's got to be huge. So what do? You play it safe. You self-censor. You just don't ask the risky questions. And that, right there, is where the danger to scientific progress really starts. Okay, so this might sound a little abstract. Let's make it real. We're going to look at a case study of this chilling effect in action, and we'll start with one of the most sensitive topics out there, the scientific study of race.
Whoa, okay, look at this. The data here is pretty striking. Just check out the shift in the language scientists are using. Back in the 90s, you'd see terms like racial differences, but now it's all about structural racism and health inequities. Now, this isn't just about changing a few words. This is a fundamental rewrite of what science is even allowed to look into.
And make no mistake, this didn't just happen by accident. The argument is that this shift is a strategic choice, a way to avoid risk. Think about it. If you're a researcher, which path is safer for your career? Studying how societal systems work, or exploring potentially explosive biological differences between groups? Even if those differences could have huge medical importance, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Now, let's be fair. This pressure isn't all bad. It has pushed science to have higher ethical standards, which is great. But there's a massive downside. The fear of being labeled a genetic determinist is so strong that scientists might just completely avoid vital research. For instance, questions like, why do certain genetic diseases affect some populations more than others? That creates what the source we're looking at calls knowledge vacuums. Huge blind spots in our understanding that could be a danger to all of us.
And you know what? We see this exact same pattern playing out in another incredibly sensitive area, the science of sex and gender. This is where the line between biology and identity is becoming the new front line in this whole ideological battle.
Here's the really interesting part. It's not like research on this is stopped. Actually, there's more of it than ever. But, and this is the whole point, the focus of that research has completely flipped on its head. Scientists are asking totally different questions now, and it's not by chance. So what's the big change? It's this really sharp dividing line being drawn between biological sex, chromosomes, anatomy, the hardware, and gender, which is now framed as a social identity. This one distinction has basically rerouted an entire field of science, pushing it away from biology and toward sociology. And look, this isn't just an academic debate. This has real-world consequences. Your doctor absolutely needs to know your biological sex to treat something like heart disease correctly, or to get your prescription dosage right. So what happens if we start swapping out biological sex for gender identity on medical records, like some people are pushing for? Well, you risk throwing out decades of life-saving medical research. It's a huge gamble. All right, let's zoom out for a second. What's the bigger picture here? When you look at these case studies on race and gender together, they point to this new kind of boundary being built around science. And this boundary isn't defined by what's scientifically possible, but by what's ideologically acceptable.
And this right here gets to the absolute heart of the argument. The fundamental question science asks is being changed. It used to be, okay, what are the internal, biological, or genetic factors here? Now the question is almost always, what external social systems are causing this? And the argument is that this isn't a natural evolution. It's a forced pivot away from entire fields of inquiry.
When you do that, you risk ending up in a really dangerous place. It has a fancy name, epistemological closure, but it's a simple and kind of scary idea. It's when science stops being a search for answers and becomes a machine to confirm an answer you've already decided is true, that all differences are just caused by social systems. If that's the only conclusion you're allowed to reach, well, you're not really doing science anymore, are you?
So, if that's the problem, what on earth is the solution? Well, the source material we're drawing from proposes a really bold, maybe even controversial idea for how to protect science from these pressures.
First, the idea is that science as a whole needs to kind of toughen up. It needs to develop what's called institutional resilience. What does that mean? It means being able to handle criticism, to own up to its past mistakes, absolutely. But it also means having the backbone to stick to its main job, following the evidence no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be.
And then comes the most radical proposal of all, using the law. The argument goes that the social pressure from cancel culture has just become so intense that the only way to truly protect scientific freedom might be to pass actual legislation that formally separates academic research from the whims of ideology. Think of it like a new wall between science and dogma, but one that's enforced by law.
And so we're left right back where we started, with a modern version of Galileo's dilemma. How do we protect science from today's dogma, whatever that may be, without sealing it off in an ivory tower totally disconnected from the society it's supposed to serve? Finding the answer to that? Well, that's the great challenge of our new Galileo moment.